This is my true story. I lived my whole life for my family. I thought old age would bring peace, love, and respect. But instead, my only son gave me pain. He once looked me in the eye and said I was worthless. I kept silent for too long. But one night, when he hurt me again, I decided it was time to act. I called 911 and showed them what he had done. What happened next changed everything. Before I share it, tell me where you are watching from, and please subscribe so more people can hear my story. I was born poor, but I learned early that hard work could build a life. My back bent under the weight of labor from the time I was young. I worked in the fields when the sun was burning, and I carried stones when my hands were already bleeding. I had nothing for myself, but I dreamed of a different life for my son. I wanted him to have shoes without holes, books without torn pages, and food that filled his stomach every night. I wanted him to walk in school with his head high, not ashamed like I once was. Every coin I earned went to him, and every dream I had was tied to his future. I worked long hours, often skipping meals, and my body grew thin. But I told myself it was worth it. My son would never know hunger. My son would never know shame. When I bought him his first school uniform, I did not buy myself a coat for the winter. When I gave him money for books, I walked barefoot home because I had no bus fare left. These choices hurt me, but they made me proud. I believed that a father's duty was not comfort, but sacrifice. Every morning, I left home before sunrise. Sometimes he was still asleep, and I kissed his forehead quietly. I told myself that one day he would understand why I worked so much. When I carried heavy loads, my hands shook, but in my mind, I saw his smile. I thought that one day he would say, "Father, you gave me everything." That hope kept me moving. It kept my tired legs strong, even when they wanted to stop. Years passed, and I did not save anything for myself. While other men drank or bought fine clothes, I worked and saved for him. When my son grew older, he never saw the holes in my shoes because I hid them. He never knew I sometimes went to bed hungry so he could have meat. He never saw me cough blood after nights of hard work. I hid my pain because I wanted him to grow up without worry. My pride was his comfort, and I carried that burden with quiet strength. I gave up my own dreams. I once wanted to travel, to see more of the world beyond our small town. But instead, I stayed, working the same job year after year, so that my son's dreams could be larger than mine. I wanted him to fly, even if I stayed on the ground. I wanted him to build a future on the foundation of my broken hands. To me, that was love. To me, that was purpose. My only joy was watching him grow. When he first held a pen, I smiled. When he spoke in English, I clapped. When he got good marks in school, I felt the pain in my body fade away for a moment. I believed everything I gave up was worth it. My life was nothing, but his life would be everything. That was the hope I carried through long nights and endless work. I thought he saw me. I thought he knew. But I learned later that sometimes sacrifice goes unnoticed. Sometimes children grow not with gratitude, but with arrogance. I learned that the hard way. At first, I did not see the change in my son. It came slowly, like rust eating at iron. He was polite as a boy, quiet when I spoke, eager to learn when I showed him how to live with honesty. But as he grew older and earned his own money, his words began to turn sharp. Where there was once respect, there was now impatience. He rolled his eyes when I gave advice. He sighed heavily when I asked simple questions. I told myself it was youth, that one day he would return to kindness, but in truth, something deeper was breaking between us. When he found work and began to bring home a larger salary than I ever earned, pride swelled in him. Instead of remembering the years of sacrifice, he looked at me as if I were small. I noticed it in his tone. He spoke to me not as a son to a father, but as a boss to a servant. My heart hurt each time, but I swallowed my feelings. I thought patience would fix it, that respect would come back once he matured more. I did not want to fight with him because I still loved him more than myself. Then came the moments that cut me deeper. At family gatherings, he would dismiss my words in front of relatives. When I told a story from the past, he would laugh and say it was useless to talk about poor times. He mocked my struggles, the same struggles that fed him. Neighbors who once praised me now looked confused when they saw how my own son treated me. Their silence was heavy, and I carried it on my shoulders like a stone. He started ignoring traditions that had shaped our family. I taught him respect for elders, the value of kindness, and the strength of humility. But he called those things old-fashioned. He waved away the customs I held dear. He said times had changed, and my ways were outdated. To him, my lessons were no longer wisdom, but jokes. He did not see that without those lessons, he would not have the foundation he stood on. My blood and sweat built his present, yet he mocked the very roots of that tree. Each evening, when I tried to sit with him and speak, his phone kept him distracted. His eyes were on screens, not on me. He answered with short, clipped words, as if I were disturbing him. I remembered the little boy who once held my hand when crossing the road. Now that same boy barely looked at me when I spoke. My chest grew heavy each night, but I told myself again, maybe tomorrow will be different. Maybe tomorrow he will sit beside me and ask about my day. But tomorrow never came. His jokes became cruel. In front of his friends, he laughed at my old clothes, my shaking hands, and my slow walk. They laughed with him, and I sat there quietly, pretending not to hear. But inside, I felt myself shrinking. I had spent years building his pride, only for him to destroy mine. The cracks between us widened, and I stood on one side, watching the son I raised slip away into arrogance. Still, I said nothing. My silence was not weakness, but love. I thought, he is young. He will learn. He will remember my sacrifices one day. But deep down, a voice whispered that I was losing him forever. That whisper grew louder with every insult, every cold glance, every laugh at my expense. I held back my tears because I did not want him to see me break. But the truth was, I was already breaking inside. It happened one evening when the house was quiet, but my heart still remembers the noise of that moment. We had a small disagreement, nothing serious, just me asking him to respect certain things in the home. He turned suddenly, his eyes burning with anger, and in a voice louder than thunder, he shouted, "You're worthless." The sound of those words hit me harder than any blow could. My body froze where I stood, and for a moment the air felt too heavy to breathe. I had given him everything I could, yet in that single moment he reduced my entire life to nothing. The word clung to me like a shadow I could not shake off. Worthless. It echoed inside my chest, bouncing against every memory of sacrifice I had made for him. I remembered the days when I walked in torn shoes so he could wear new ones. I remembered the nights when I went hungry so he could eat his fill. I remembered carrying him on my back when he was tired, teaching him to write his first words, holding him when he cried. All those years, all those moments of love and pain were erased in a single insult. I did not reply. My lips stayed closed, but inside, my heart cracked wide open. I felt a silence settle over me, heavier than stone. My pride as a father had been wounded beyond repair. For decades, I believed that a son would one day honor his father, but in that instant, I saw clearly that my belief had been foolish. His success, his arrogance, his anger, all of it had swallowed the boy I once knew. My son was gone, replaced by a man who saw me as nothing. The shame was not private. The neighbors heard his voice through the walls. Some even turned their heads the next day when they saw me outside, as if they did not know what to say. My relatives, too, began to look at me with pity, their eyes asking questions I could not answer. I wanted to disappear, to hide from the world, because the word worthless had been spoken not only to me, but also to anyone who could hear. It branded me, as if my life had no meaning. But deep inside that pain, something else began to rise, a fire I had not felt in years. I realized that if I stayed silent, his words would bury me alive. Every bruise I had hidden, every insult I had swallowed, every night I had cried alone, it would all be forgotten if I did not act. His cruelty was not only an insult to me, but to the very life I had lived. And I could not let that stand. That word, worthless, did more than break my heart. It woke me up. It told me that silence had gone on too long. It showed me that love without respect becomes slavery. It reminded me that dignity is worth more than peace bought with silence. In that moment, standing in the wreckage of his words, I began to form a resolve. I would no longer just endure. I would no longer cover my wounds. I would no longer pretend his cruelty was small. I walked away from that argument without another word, but my mind was no longer the same. I carried his insult with me, but not as a wound. I carried it as fuel. I decided that the world would see the truth, even if my son wanted to hide it. He had called me worthless, but I would show everyone what he truly was. My silence had ended. The battle for my dignity had begun. His anger did not stop with words. In the days after that evening, his temper grew sharper. When he was frustrated, his hand would rise faster than his voice. I remember the first time he pushed me hard against the kitchen wall. The pain spread through my back, but I stayed quiet. Another day, he gripped my arm so tightly that his fingers left dark marks under my skin. I would roll down my sleeves and pretend everything was fine when neighbors visited. I told myself he was just stressed, that it would pass, but deep inside I knew the truth. This was not carelessness. It was cruelty. Each bruise had its own memory. One on my shoulder from when I asked him to lower his voice. One on my wrist from when he yanked something out of my hand. One on my ribs from when he shoved me while walking past. These marks became my silent witnesses. They told a story even when my mouth could not. They burned when I lay in bed at night, a dull pain that would not go away, reminding me of the home that had turned into a place of fear. I became skilled at hiding. Long sleeves in the summer, scarves even when it was warm. Moving slowly so no one would see me wince. The neighbors would sometimes look at me and ask if I was tired or unwell. I would nod, smile weakly, and say I was fine. But I was not fine. I was disappearing. Piece by piece, my dignity, my body, my spirit were being chipped away. My house had walls, but no safety. My life had people, but no kindness. At night, when the house was quiet, I would sit on the edge of my bed and stare at the marks on my arms. I would remember the boy he once was. The boy who held my finger when he learned to walk. The boy who cried when he scraped his knee. The boy who hugged me tight when he was scared of storms. I would ask myself how that boy had turned into this man. But no answer came. Only silence, like the silence I lived in. I did not tell anyone. Not my friends. Not my relatives. Shame is a powerful cage. It whispers that no one will believe you, that you will only look weak, that speaking up will make things worse. So I swallowed my words. I cleaned my wounds in secret. I kept my voice soft. I acted as if everything was normal. But inside, something was breaking. My body was covered with marks I could hide, but my heart was covered with marks no one could see. One evening, while I was rolling down my sleeves, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For a moment, I did not recognize myself. The man staring back at me looked older, smaller, weaker. His eyes were tired, his face hollow. But behind those eyes, a small flicker still burned. That flicker was my will to survive. That flicker whispered that I did not deserve this. That flicker told me I had to protect myself before it was too late. That was the moment I began to plan. Not revenge, not anger. Protection. Truth. I began to think about how to make the world see what was happening behind closed doors. I began to imagine the day I would stop covering my arms, stop hiding my pain, stop living in silence. The bruises were silent, but I would not be. Not forever. I knew silence was my enemy. Every day I stayed quiet, the situation grew worse. Every time I hid my bruises, I was helping him hide his cruelty. I understood now that he would not change just because I wished it. He had no fear of consequences. He had no respect left for me, and I had no safety left inside this house. I had spent years protecting him from hunger, shame, and pain. Now, I had to protect myself. This realization did not come with anger. It came with a deep, steady calm. I began to collect small pieces of evidence. I took pictures of my bruises in secret. I wrote dates and times in a notebook, recording what happened after each incident. I kept this notebook hidden inside an old shoebox under my bed. I also started keeping the clothes that were torn or stained when he pushed or grabbed me. These became my proof. Proof that my pain was not a story I made up. Proof that my dignity had been taken. Proof that I deserved to be heard. I started reading about my rights. I learned that age does not erase your right to safety. I learned that even a son can be held accountable when he harms his parent. I learned that silence protects the abuser, but truth protects the victim. These were not just words. They became a map in my head. They guided me out of fear and into action. At first, the thought of exposing him filled me with guilt. This was my child. I had carried him, fed him, taught him, sacrificed for him. To turn him in felt like betrayal. But then I remembered. He had betrayed me first. He had betrayed the father who stayed up at night to earn money for his schooling. He had betrayed the man who stood in the sun to build a future for him. This was not betrayal. This was self-respect. This was survival. I started preparing myself mentally. I rehearsed what I would say if someone asked me why I had stayed silent so long. I practiced looking at my bruises without crying. I reminded myself that I was not weak. Weakness was enduring abuse without hope. Strength was choosing to end it. Every night before I slept, I told myself one sentence: I will not be silent forever. It became my prayer. It became my plan. Then came the day when his rage went further than before. That night, as I cleaned a cut on my arm, something inside me hardened. I realized that if I did not act now, I might not get another chance. My body could only take so much. My spirit could only endure so much. That night, I put my notebook and pictures into a small bag. I hid it near the door. I decided that the next time he raised his hand, it would be the last. In the morning, I stood by the window watching the street outside. People were walking to work. Children were going to school. Life moved on, and here I was, frozen in a cycle of pain. But now, I had a plan. I would call the police. I would show them everything. I would tell the truth. I would not scream or shout. I would simply reveal the facts. And when I imagined that moment, for the first time in many years, I felt a quiet kind of hope. The day finally came. His anger rose like a storm, louder and harder than before. I stood still, but inside my heart was beating fast. This time, I did not hide. I did not cover my arm. I did not lower my eyes. I waited until he left the room. Then I walked slowly to the phone. My hands were shaking, but I held the phone tight. I knew this call would change everything. I pressed the numbers carefully, one at a time. When I heard the sound on the other side, my breath became steady. I told them my name. I told them my address. I said, I need help. My voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of many years. I spoke slowly, making sure they understood. I told them about the bruises. I told them about the cuts. I told them about the nights when I could not sleep because of fear. They listened. They did not rush me. They asked questions. I answered. For the first time, someone was writing my pain into a record. My silence was breaking. The person on the other side of the phone spoke softly. They said officers were on their way. They asked if I was safe at that moment. I said yes. They told me to stay where I was. I hung up the phone and sat down on the chair. My hands were still shaking, but a strange peace came over me. The hardest part was done. I had spoken. I had asked for help. I sat there waiting, feeling the minutes pass slowly. Every sound in the house felt louder. My son did not know what I had done. He was in another room, thinking life would go on as before. He did not know the cycle was ending. He did not know that his father had finally chosen to protect himself. As I waited, I thought about my journey. From the day he was born, I had promised to protect him. And I had. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to protect myself. I allowed my love to cover his cruelty. I allowed my guilt to cover his violence. Now that cover was gone. The truth was standing in the open, and I was standing with it. I heard the sound of cars stopping outside. I looked out the window and saw the police arriving. They moved quickly, but not with panic. They walked with purpose. They came to the door and knocked firmly. My heart raced, but I opened the door. This was the moment. This was the point of no return. When they entered, I stepped aside. I told them everything again, this time face to face. They looked at me, at my arms, at my face. They wrote notes. They asked to see the proof. I handed them my bag with the pictures, the notebook, the clothes. I spoke slowly, not as a victim, but as a witness. Each word felt like a stone being lifted from my back. Each question they asked was another door opening out of the dark. The police stood in my small living room. Their eyes moved from my face to my arms. They saw the marks. They saw the bruises. They asked me to roll up my sleeves. I did. The silence between us was heavy. They did not need my words to understand. My body told the story. I showed them everything, slowly, carefully. My arms, my back, the places I had hidden under long clothes. It was no longer a secret. It was no longer invisible. I opened the bag I had kept hidden under my bed. Inside were pictures of my injuries, dates written under each one. Inside were papers showing money he had taken from me, messages he had sent full of anger, witnesses' notes from neighbors who had heard shouting. I handed the bag to them. They opened it and looked through everything. Their faces changed. They were no longer just polite. They were serious now, their pens moving fast, their radios clicking with words I could not hear. One of the officers asked me to tell the story from the beginning. I spoke quietly, one memory at a time. I told them how it started with harsh words. I told them how it turned to pushing, then to bruises. I told them about nights I stayed awake, waiting for the door to open. I told them about my silence, about my shame. They listened. They did not interrupt. Every sentence became part of a report. As I spoke, I felt lighter. It was as if a locked door inside me had opened. For years, I had been afraid to let anyone know. For years, I had tried to protect my son, even as he hurt me. But now, the truth had left my mouth and entered their notebooks. The truth had shape. It had weight. It could no longer be denied. They asked me where my son was. I pointed to the other room. They asked if he was armed. I said no. They moved carefully, speaking to each other quietly. I could hear their boots on the floor. They went to the door and called his name. He came out confused. He saw me sitting there. He saw the police. He did not smile. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was thick. He looked at me, his eyes wide. He tried to speak, but stopped. The police stood firm. One officer told him to sit down. Another officer began reading something from a paper. His face changed. He realized what was happening. He realized the secret was over. I stayed quiet. I did not shout. I did not cry. I only sat, my hands on my knees, my head high. This was not a fight. This was truth stepping into the light. This was not revenge. This was survival. For years he had made me small. But now, in front of these officers, I was not small. I was seen. The police looked at my son and told him to stand up. He argued at first, saying it was a mistake, saying I was confused, saying I was old and did not remember things clearly. His voice grew louder, but the officers did not move back. They stayed calm, steady, professional. They told him to keep his hands visible. They told him not to resist. He laughed nervously, looking around the room, but his laughter faded when the handcuffs came out. The sound of metal clicking open filled the house like thunder. I watched him freeze. For years he had spoken to me with power, but now he was powerless. The officers moved forward, one on each side. They took his arms. He tried to pull away, but their grip was firm. They told him it was not up for debate. His words would not save him. His excuses would not save him. His lies would not save him. The cuffs locked around his wrists. The sound was sharp. It cut through the silence. My son, the man who once called me worthless, was now standing in my home with his hands bound. The neighbors began to notice. Curtains moved. Doors opened a little. Eyes peered in from across the street. Whispers floated through the air. People who had once seen him walking proudly now saw him held down by law. Some shook their heads. Some gasped. Some whispered to each other, their mouths covered by hands. The shame that he had thrown at me now fell on him. It was heavy. It was public. The officers asked if I wanted to say anything. I shook my head. There was nothing more to say. My silence was louder than any word. I did not want revenge in that moment. I wanted dignity. I wanted the truth to be seen by everyone. And it was. It stood there, handcuffed, no longer able to hide behind pride or power. As they walked him out of the house, I stayed seated. I could hear the sound of his shoes scraping against the floor, the clink of the cuffs with each step, the steady voices of the officers guiding him out. When the door opened, the cool air entered the room, carrying the murmurs of the crowd outside. My son's head was lowered. He did not look at me. He did not look at anyone. The weight of shame bent his back. I stood slowly and followed to the doorway. I watched as they placed him in the police car. The neighbors stood gathered in small groups, their eyes wide. The man who once stood tall among them now sat behind glass and steel. The doors closed. The engine started. The car moved forward, taking him away. The street grew quiet again, but the memory would stay. Everyone had seen. Everyone would remember. I stepped back inside and closed the door. My hands trembled slightly, but my heart felt steady. For the first time in years, the house was mine again. It was no longer filled with fear. It was filled with silence, but not the silence of hiding. It was the silence of peace. Now, as I sit here in my old age, I look back on the years with a quiet heart. My story is not one of anger, but one of truth. I lived through betrayal, through pain, through words that cut deeper than any knife. I was called worthless by the very son I had raised with all the strength I had. Those words could have broken me forever, but I chose to let them shape a different ending. I learned that silence does not protect you. Silence only feeds cruelty. For too long, I covered my bruises. For too long, I let my dignity hide in the shadows. I believed that patience would bring respect, but patience only gave him more power. It took me years to understand that truth is the only shield, and courage is the only weapon. When I dialed 911, I did not just call the police. I called for my freedom. I called for every father who has been silenced. I called for every old man who hides his scars. That call was not just for me. It was for anyone who has ever been told they are nothing. The officers who came did not just see my bruises. They saw my story. They saw decades of sacrifice erased by arrogance. They wrote it down, and the world finally listened. I carry no hate for my son now. Hate is heavy, and I have carried enough weight in my life. What I carry is clarity. He thought he could reduce me to nothing with his words, but he reduced himself instead. He lost respect, he lost freedom, and he lost the place of honor a son should hold. I may have lost his love, but I kept my dignity. To those who hear my story, remember this. Respect is not given because of blood. It is given because of how we treat each other. A child who forgets sacrifice forgets their own roots. A son who mocks his father mocks himself. Family is not about words spoken in public. It is about actions done in private. I sit now with peace in my home. I breathe without fear. I walk without shame. The world may call me old, but I am not weak. My story is proof that no one is too old to stand for truth. No one is too small to bring down cruelty. No one is truly worthless when they carry dignity inside their heart. He called me worthless, but the world saw who truly carried no worth. That is my final lesson, and that is the truth I leave behind.